Hey, Daniel, thanks for joining us today. As a way of getting started, give us a little background on yourself.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Brian. Thanks for having me. I've been following you for quite some time and really enjoy your content. So thank you for that. But yeah, most of my sales background has been at a company called Segra. We're a telecommunications company providing fiber optics for connectivity, whether that's DIA, WAN, LAN. But we also provided a plethora of managed IT services on top of that. So whether it was security, whether it was cloud using data centers and whatnot. But doing that for quite some time. Started in 2011 as a sales rep. Did that for 3 years. Was the number one producer. It was more of a startup at that point in time. We were actually called Spirit Communications. But in 2014, they promoted me to a regional office where I managed a team and did that for 3 years. And I guess I did that well enough to get promoted again to be over the state of South Carolina as a director. I was over three markets in that state. Did that for about 2 or 3 years, and then they promoted me to being over the VP of Enterprise Sales, which was over our Southeast region, which covered three states, nine enterprise markets, and did that from January of 2019 until January of this past year. And I'm actually in transition as some consulting opportunities has presented itself, and so I'm looking into that. So through that time, we went through two major acquisitions, one being private equity, being EQT, and then we just recently in 2021 sold to Cox Communications. So I've seen those two major transactions go through, which was an experience in Excel, and we went through one large merger as well.
Great. And what do you attribute your success in sales to?
Passion, drive, all the characteristics that you see in most, but it's really just fell in love with the brand. I fell in love with we were somewhat of the disruptor brand. We really challenged, the cable cos out there, the AT&Ts, the Lumens of the world by being more local, regionally focused, and just fell in love with that, and then fell in love with the ability to layer services over top of a network where it wasn't really a commodity type sale. It was more of a solution complex sale.
Yeah. And what's your view on sales art versus science? Do you have strong feelings on that?
I do. I do. So, I would say I think there's a big debate on, if it's the art of sales or if the science of sales. I think it's more transactional sales. I could understand the approach from a scientific perspective, but I think when it comes to the more complex solution-based sale, it's the art of how you get it done, and it's how you paint the picture. It's how you deliver the message. It's all in the details, and it makes a difference. And I think sometimes making that transition from transactional to complex is very difficult.
And what was it like managing a bunch of artists, though? Because managers love the science because they can see a dashboard. It's easy to count stuff. It's very hard to judge an artist.
It's tough, right? It's tough because I never really managed based off of a CRM. Wasn't
How do you do it then?
it was, it's challenging, right? It's really through engagement, conversation, being in the field, being with the reps. I think one of the best methods to training is asking questions. A lot of times the reps would come back and I would, hey, what type of firewall they have? What kind of phones are they using? Who's their current provider? And honestly, the amount that they could provide, what the percentage of feedback that they could provide back to me would give me a really good gauge on how well trained they were, right? If they could answer 80% of the questions, I knew, hey, we're in a pretty good spot. And I think they knew that as well. But if they could only answer 20%, they would be like, oh, I can only answer 20% of Daniel's questions. Why is he asking me these questions? Because they're relevant. So to your point, I think there's a fine line there, right? On being able to scale and being able to kind of manage the right type of KPIs. But in the artist world, as we're speaking, it's more about the conversations, engagement, the day to day, just behaviors.
And how did that get viewed above you in the organization? Because the higher you go up, the closer they want it to be to a science.
You're exactly right, and I think that's because that was a challenge as we continue to get bigger and bigger and go through the acquisitions. The challenge was being able to communicate um, the sales methodology to the senior team. Um, and because they wanted to see the reports and whatnot, but it didn't tell the entire story. So there's not a really great answer to your question. It was more about, again, me being able to communicate, right, what the reports meant and why we looked at what we looked at, and trying to find the right indicators to look at, and not because everybody attributes it to activity, right? Activity, activity, activity. But you can do bad activity and do a lot of it
Sure
and
can.
get no results. So what are the activities that actually indicate are indicators, right? Whether that means conversations, right? That means, quotes, that means appointments, that means demos. I mean, I want to measure those type of things because that's what matters. Not
Yeah.
how many emails you sent, not how many phone calls you did, because you can do it not well and do a lot of it, and you just get a lot more of not doing it well.
Yeah. And how did you build a culture of success?
Yeah, it's funny you asked. It's really the culture of success is, through the team. And I think I sent you something as far as, the what I looked for when I was managing one of our markets was at lunch. I wanted to see if were the reps going to lunch with each other, where the lunch, did they talk to one another about the deals? Because I knew if they were going to lunch or happy hour, that what they're talking about? They're talking about work. They were talking about a deal. They were talking about an objection. They were talking about, a competitor. They were talking about something that was helping to scale their knowledge. So it's not only about peer-to-peer interaction, but it's about developing a healthy culture, a culture that breeds success. Team celebrations, recognition. It's about providing, that type of culture where the team members compete with each other, but they also really care for one another.
Yeah. Because as a leader, they kind of look at you as, well, you're not doing it. You're not in the field every day. It's nice. You get to be in the cushy office and the nice donuts and the coffee. You're not seeing what we're seeing.
Yeah, I think that's one of the benefits I had coming from, being a sales rep at the company. Now, when I took over the manager's role, I went from one market where I was doing the sales role to another market. So I moved, but I still knew. It was funny. In my first couple of days, I had to go through that transition of understanding how to manage a team, right? Not just be a producer. And at first, it's a hard transition because you play like super rep, right? Like you have like these 6 reps, and you're like, hey, just set all these appointments and I'll go out there and close them. And then you're running yourself ragged and you're like, man, I can't scale this way. I got to
Yeah.
figure out a better way. But it's funny, I think in my first couple of months, I was in my office and I was actually making cold calls myself, like setting up meetings and whatnot. And one of the reps came in there and was like, what are you doing? And I'm like, man, we got to get revenue. Like I just had that mentality, right? I never, even as a VP, I never saw myself any different than a rep. I had a different platform and a different voice, but it was still all in a sense of, the day to day of a rep. Because if I couldn't speak their language, how effective can I be talking to the CEO or whoever else on best strategies or kind of methodologies?
And what do you think of as a sales process? Because a lot of people view it like the CRM, where it's, discovery call, presentation, demo, propose, negotiate, close. And that's the way we like it to be. It
Right.
doesn't turn out that way very often now, does it?
No, it doesn't. I mean, I think that you need to understand what the process looks like. You need to understand how it always starts with a conversation in my view, because especially when we're selling the complex services, there might be 1% or 2% of the industry that's actually in the market to make a decision at that point in time. So what happens is some of these reps get in this rat race as far as just trying to find something to quote for next month, and that's not how it works. It works with, creating a conversation to get to a connection, to find out when they do need those services and if the services that you provide might be a match, right? Because that might be next year, but getting their mindset to be looking at it from a year perspective or a pipeline perspective within the next 18 months is how you build the right type of pipeline. So, but to answer your question, it's more about understanding the process and how it starts from conversation to signature, and understanding where you are in that process and owning the process. I know in many of your podcasts you've said something about teaching them how to buy. Right? We take it for granted that they buy these services every single day, and honestly, even as a consumer, sometimes I don't know how to buy stuff.
Of course not. How
And
would you?
thinking, yeah, and thinking about, you're advising them, and the best reps know how to take it from a conversation to a first appointment, to a first appointment to a technical design, from a technical design to a demo, to a demo to a proposal, to a proposal to negotiation, or red lines or what. But it's taking it from step by step all the way through the process. That's what they do really, really well.
And when 2% of the market's in market, is this a latent pain that you have to turn active, or is it a timing thing where they're just not going to need it until some event happens?
Yeah, I think in what we were doing is both, because we were providing connectivity. So in that industry, they're under contract usually for like a 3 or 5 year term. So they knew who their provider was, whether that was a cable co or an AT&T, and when that contract came up. However, when you started to layer the managed services on top of that, that was more of educating them on what services that they may not have that they may need. And so that's where, building that curiosity or building that interest became so key, because then you were able to mesh it within the network infrastructure, and you were able to kind of build that whole solution.
And I got to imagine that that sale was a whole lot more complex than more the the core business.
It was one of our greatest challenges. It was really because the old teleco days is more of a transactional sale. It was, hey,
Yeah.
how much bandwidth do you have? Oh, you have 100 meg. Let me see what I can do for 200 meg, right? Or really back in the day, it was T1s and whatnot. But as we evolved into fiber, but yeah, the largest transition is to understand how to have, ask great questions, right? Great questions lead to sales, right? Because you're pointing them in the direction that you need to drive them to get the result that you're looking for. But you've got to ask and understand. And the problem is a lot of times you can tell reps what questions to ask. However, if they don't understand the question, they don't understand how the question is going to be answered or what questions may come back. They're not going to ask that questions because they're somewhat intimidated by that. So it's the whole training, it's the whole, just perspective changing on, how they see a deal, how they go about a deal, how to, it's changing the entire cycle, the entire process.
Yeah. And what were your go-to questions to get the client talking, to qualify them, to gauge their level of interest, where they are in the decision
Yeah,
process?
it's funny. We created this crazy kind of compartmentalized buckets, and we'd always start with the network. So we always talk about, hey, tell me about your network. How many locations do you have? Do you guys have dual providers? Is it single threaded? What is the network? I would always start with the network.
Yeah.
Right. And then we would move on from there to security questions. Tell me about, what kind of security threats, top three concerns, what type of firewalls do you have today? Are they next gen? But we would go through the basic set of questions for within each of those, right? With security, cloud, Wi-Fi, hosted voice, or just voice in general. And then based on that, I always said, look for the top, when you come out of that meeting, what's the top 2 or 3 priorities? And the problem is it can't be your top 3 priorities, right?
Right. It doesn't matter what yours
Because
are.
if you think their top priority is security, and it's really their third priority, you're not going to make the sale, because they got to solve for number 1 and 2 first. So making sure you understand what number 1 and number 2 is key, because that's where you hook them, right? Sometimes you got to hook them and then expand on additional services, but you've got to understand what the priorities of their business is, and making sure that it's aligned to how they think it is as well.
And what were the sounds that you heard that would tell you that it was a real deal that you could win?
Well, I think it's the amount of feedback, honestly, right? It's the amount of questions that they may ask you about a particular service, or that you can, or they're more transparent about an issue or a need that they may have. It becomes transparent based on asking the right question, because it leads to them asking additional questions that you can tell is a pain point, right? And being able to do that is like, that's where I always said that's the magic, right? It's in the discovery questions. It's in, bringing back, and we had sales engineers as well. So we had, our technical arm that would, assist us with that as well. But making sure that we partnered and made sure that we came away with that meeting, understanding, our next steps, it was key.
Yeah. And how did you get reps to really embrace the process as opposed to shooting from the hip or thinking they're MacGyver, where they can handle any situation? Just put me in the right role, chief. I'll take care of it.
Right. Yeah, it's a difficult task. I'm not going to lie to you. I mean, being able to help them understand what that looked like, what the process was, understand the questions, right? I mean, a lot of that I think is missed based on the lack of training and focus
Yeah.
that organizations, kind of don't do, right? And it's like, it's somewhat surprising to me is, we just expect, hey, we're on an NFL team or NBA, but we don't ever practice, or we don't have a playbook, and we don't have anything to reference, but we expect to go win, right? And so I think the level of focus, especially within a complex sale, you've got to have focus on the training aspect, whether that's role plays, discovery questions, whether that's just handling objections, right? What is your competitors, what is how do we position ourselves? I mean, it's just all those things through repetition and repetition. And again, kind of going back to my earlier example, is the amount of discussion between the reps and the office collaboration. I'll tell you, Brian, I mean, COVID really hurt us, and it really hurt us through isolation, right?
Yeah.
Because it hurt the reps to be isolated, because they didn't have peer-to-peer interaction, right? They didn't have the hallway 5-minute discussion. They didn't have their, FaceTime with the sales engineers, or kind of that car ride from the office to the appointment, where they would get to know the sales engineers, knock those barriers down, and then really talk about, ask the vulnerable questions. So
Yes.
really, it's just, to my earlier point, driving that, office culture, and making sure that everybody's aligned with how you go about doing the job is incredibly important.
Well, that's it. When you're on a team and you have, let's say, 9 other reps, you get the opportunity for that pattern matching to see all the case studies as opposed to one person. How many can you see in a day? 2 or 3 maybe?
Absolutely. It's so funny. So new reps come in and they're like, Daniel, I make market visits, and they tell me, Daniel, what is the magic formula? What's the secret bullet? And my answer was, it's the process. Like, you've got to go through the process. And they didn't like hearing that answer,
They don't
right?
wanna hear it. They wanna like,
And I told them, I'd say the fastest way you can scale is by scheduling conversations. Like, at first, there is no bad conversations, because first you got to fail to be able to succeed, right? You got to know what to not call on to start to understand what do I call on, right? And so, and then you also, they were live reps, like you were able to go out and have live conversations, and you would learn so much for that. And I would tell them all the time, the more conversations you can have, the faster you're going to scale. So, don't try to learn the product. Don't try to, understand everything before you go out. You got to just go out and start having those conversations, and those conversations. Because you're right. Like, if each rep has 2 or 3 conversations, now
take
you're talking about,
forever.
that's 25 use cases in a day, rather than, 3 that they've experienced themselves.
That's it, and that builds on the pattern matching, the false positives, the all the signals that a rep who's been doing it for years can weed through.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's so telling to see it on this side, but on their side, I get it. And sometimes, I didn't. value kind of that experience even through myself, being able to see it all and be like, how come you don't see it like this, right? But really being able to try to communicate what the structure and the process look like is really key to their development.
Yeah, because when the client doesn't understand how to buy and the sales rep doesn't understand how to sell and how clients buy, it's kind of the blind leading the blind. And it's only by luck that it might happen.
Right. Absolutely.
And how long, or did you find a way of getting new reps up to speed faster to get them over what's the silver bullet? What's the secret? That
Well, I
first
think,
step.
yeah, I mean, one, I think we started to change on, kind of our hiring requirements, right? Trying to find people more from the MSP space, or more from the service providers, because then they at least had a level of understanding of, because some of these are technical and it does, require some time to understand the products and how do you position them and how do they help solve a problem. But at the end of the day, I always preached, you got to understand, you're basically a business analyst. Like if you can go in there and just talk about technology as a whole, like what do they do? Like what do they use for how do they chat internally? What kind of systems are they interacting with their customers? What issues are they having, from a technological standpoint? You're just having a business conversation. You're not having a technical conversation. Now, the problem, that's where we translate the business into the technical
Yeah.
and help them understand this product is going to solve this business application for you. But yeah, it was really just finding that talent. And then again, I think ramping up the training, ramping up, kind of, I started doing some podcasts to go through success wins, right? To kind of go through, hey, why did you call them
Case
these guys?
studies.
Yeah,
Yeah.
case studies. We do case studies, and provide that information because everybody was interested to know, hey, how did they sell that deal? Or, how did they sell it? How do they leverage these services or products? So just the communication as a whole, and being able to kind of breed whatever success, you're having.
And how would you differentiate or characterize the very best reps that you had the opportunity to work with the average? What were the characteristics, skills?
Yeah, the characteristics are always the same, right? It's the passion,
Yeah.
it's the drive, it's the commitment, it's the discipline. Now, those are, I would say, kind of the hard, like the set skills. But I would say that the best reps also had the soft skills, right? They had the self-awareness, right? They were likable. They were very authentic, right? They were coachable, they were curious. Like those soft skills, I don't know that we pay attention enough to those
Mm.
because they're as important as all the things that are kind of more noticeable up front. But
Yeah.
every rep that I've ever seen has had somewhat of those characteristics.
Yeah. Because, and I think that's the problem with the word art is it kind of it conjures up the thought of the personality versus the whole package.
That's right.
I wish there was a different word, but because those are the empathy, the curiosity coupled together with the passion of wanting to win and being conscious of there's another person on the other side of that table. What do they want?
Yeah, and it's in it, and Brian, it goes back to understanding all the little things. Like all the little things is really what makes up success, right? How well, do you build a connection, right? How well can you read body language? How well can you read tone? How well can, because I always said that the strongest connection usually wins. And it's because they the strongest connection gets the most information, right? They're most transparent with the person they like the most. So they might not like rep three as much, but they might have the best solution. But at least rep A, who they like the most, is going to get the most information to work with to be able to get the deal done. And so, but that's a skill set, right? Being able
It
to be
is.
likable, to be able to connect, to be able to understand, hey, it's, when a rep calls, a customer, does that customer want to pick up? or are they like, oh my God, that guy's pestering me, right? The ones that are like, hey, I want to talk to so and so because I just like talking to them. Those are the ones that are going to win.
That's it. And I think too many people look at that as the fluff side of sales. I go, no, that's the core component. That's the relationship. That's the test. When they see the caller ID and they see it's Daniel, do I want to talk to Daniel?
That's right.
I don't have anything for him, but I enjoy speaking to him.
That is absolutely right. And the people that, hey, I want to speak to them just because I enjoy talking with them, those are the ones who win, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And people think, oh, it's just because I like him. No, it's because you give them more information. You
Yeah,
feel more comfortable with them. You trust him more.
there's a connection, right? And obviously you've got to, you
Earn it.
yeah, you have that piece, but then you have to know what to do with it, right? Like
Yes.
you actually, then you have to go into professional mode and actually build a solution and provide the right solution and find out what the price point needs to be and what works within the system and who is actually the signer and all that good stuff, right? But they need it's a whole, that's all of it.
Right. People get stuck. Oh, it's just the weather, sports, fishing. It's like it can start there, but it does have to progress to business because you're
That
probably not going to buy just because you fish together.
yeah, that's one thing I think is misunderstood within sales in itself. Is it's just about everybody thinks, oh, you just go out there and make calls and you get stuff sold, right? It's sales is a skill. Like
It's a
it is a
big skill.
skill, and the people who are doing it well are just better than the other ones. And it's because of a lot of different reasons. But I think it's just always viewed from other departments within a company. Well, first of all, it's always viewed as, hey, it's just sales, right? They just go out there and,
Be nice.
yeah, take people to play golf or entertain them and they get orders. And it's like, no, it's actually a skill set and it's not just about activity.
Well, and people see it in every other part of their life, but they don't believe it in business because,
Right.
you know, you may go to a doctor because you like that doctor, or you may not go to another doctor because you don't like him or
That's
her.
right. That's the world.
That's the world, and that's the way it's innate in us. It-
Absolutely. And that's where that's where the prospecting piece that allows you the opportunity, that allows you the conversation, that allows the first piece of it to get to the second piece, to get to the third piece, to get, and that's where understanding the process and owning the process and navigating your way through everything you need to get through. And what I see commonly that happens with reps who aren't making it happen is they go from step one to step six, which is to quote it, right? They just think, hey, and I'm like, do you ever wonder why, you're never giving, no one's ever calling you back? Or, once you get, I always said the transformation and the sales process where the transformation of power happens is when the quote is delivered, right? Because a lot of times the customer's calling the rep, hey, do you have that quote? Do you have that quote? Do you have that quote? And then all of a sudden you prepare the quote, you give them the quote, and then what happens? Who's calling who? The rep's calling the customer, and hey, why is that customer ghosting me or not, calling me back? Because there's no value, right? They got what they needed. And so, it's about, if you give it to them too early and without everything and knowing all the information, then you're probably not going to win.
I tell people all the time, if it's not at the right time with the right person or the right circumstances, you might as well just write on it. Don't contact me unless you want something
That's right.
because they
Absolutely.
won't.
Yeah, you're right. Absolutely.
Because I think that is something that, and managers almost do just the opposite. They have the quote as a KPI as opposed, instead of a closing event, they look at
Yeah,
it as an activity, and it's like, it's pretty dangerous as an activity
it is. It is.
because what does a client naturally want to know? How much does it cost?
Yeah. Yeah, first thing, right?
Well,
Like they're trying to qualify you as
it
much as you're
doesn't
trying
mean
to
they're
qualify them.
interested,
That's right.
just means they're curious.
Right.
This has
Right.
been a great conversation, Daniel. Where can people go to connect and follow you?
Yeah, absolutely. LinkedIn, obviously there, Daniel Eskew. And yeah, look forward to hearing from anyone.